Okay. All right. Well, tonight we're going to be talking about health policy. And when it comes to talking about health policy, we've made some mistakes. We've been making appeals to intellect, not values. We assumed that if we just explain policies better, Americans would respond. But human brains are not organized this way. Research shows that if we do not first reach people with shared values, we won't reach them at all. So how can we persuade more people to support a publicly funded healthcare system? We need to communicate with effective messages, select the best methods to communicate the messages, adapt the message to the audience, and select the best messenger. And what should we say? Everything we say must be underpinned with our communication in shared values. And we know that the shared values between conservatives and liberals are the following: patriotism, families, sanctity of life, hard work, security, tribalism, loyalty, personal responsibility, simplicity, prudence, waste prevention. We should be using words like we and us, not they and them. We should use words to suggest the issue is local, like Oregonians need health security. Saying Oregonians suggest you are a member of a tribe. Security is a shared value among both liberals and conservatives. We should use words like you and your to convey the members of your audience are directly affected. I am convinced now that we did a good job, those of us who've been advocating for many years, like all of you, in communicating the moral argument that everyone should have health care and that a lot of our people who live in America don't have access to health care. But what we didn't communicate was that we were talking about everyone in the country who is affected by our appalling healthcare financing system. So people left the presentations with the impression that we were talking about those other people who don't have healthcare or don't have good enough coverage. We need to be talking about the fact that all of us are affected by our healthcare financing system, not just the people who don't have any healthcare at all. And most importantly, we should be telling stories. Stories by far are much easier for people to remember. And I'm sure Bobby, as an anthropologist, would support me in saying this is an old way that we have communicated for many, many generations, is by telling stories. People remember them. Our brains are really wired to connect with stories more than they are with facts. Well, what shouldn't we say? We should not talk only about facts describing current access to healthcare. Like, and I'm making these numbers up, obviously, but 1,275 people in Oregon don't have health insurance. 5,243 people in Oregon are underinsured. 10,693 people with diabetes can't afford their insulin. These are the ways that we have talked about why we need to change the way we finance healthcare. We have shared those kind of facts, but it was a mistake. We should not start with facts. We need to start with stories. It's okay to include some facts, but mostly the communication should evoke an emotional response to support publicly funded healthcare for everyone. And then you need to select the best methods to communicate your message. Could be a speech to a group like the local Rotarians, a town hall meeting, letters to the editor, a rally like you're just talking about that's coming up in your near future, social media, radio, television, emails, brochures, posters, all of the above and more so. Choosing the best methods to communicate your message is part of the challenge in being effective. And we need to adapt the message to our audience. An audience of senior citizens should get more information about Medicare interfacing with a new proposed publicly funded financing method. A rural audience should get more information about rural access assurances. A conservative elected official might respond better to a story about a constituent. Whatever it is, you need to tailor the message to your audience. And finally, we need to choose the right messenger. The messenger should be someone the audience already trusts or is likely to trust. Years ago, when Colorado was promoting a citizens initiative that some of you may be aware of, I decided as a nurse, I should go speak to a group of Black nurses at their association meeting. I could tell during my time with them that I was not connecting, that I was the wrong messenger. They were not convinced that I had their interests in mind in promoting a different way to finance healthcare. Someone like a Black Methodist minister, another Black nurse who's supportive might have been a better messenger, certainly, than I was. So keeping in mind, sometimes you're just the right messenger. Sometimes you need to recruit someone else to deliver exactly the same message. So here are a few slides that I've used with the Rotarians in my community, just to give you some examples of how I've tried to incorporate some of those basic principles, like underpinning the message with shared values and trying not to be tempted to start with the facts like I used to. And the first slide is, are you being ripped off? You can do better. So notice that I use the word you because I'm not talking about those other people who don't have any health insurance at all. I'm talking about all of us being ripped off by our current system. Then I start with a story. Leonard belongs to an electricians union. He worked hard all his life. He thought he had excellent health insurance plan. He thought if he needed health care, he could afford to pay 20% of the cost since the plan would cover 80%. But Leonard didn't know his multiple back surgeries, his surgery for a traumatic brain injury after a car accident followed by several strokes would cost over $2.5 million. And 20% of $2.5 million would mean Leonard personally would pay $500,000. He had to refinance his home more than once. He had hoped to have no long-term debt after he retired, but instead, he and his wife had another very big debt to pay. We can do better for your family and Leonard's. So in this story, which is the true story, this is actually one of my neighbors has experienced this. I am choosing this story because I think that a lot of people could relate to it, even though they may not have had these kinds of health problems. They can relate to that possibility. They can relate to it because they have health insurance, but it may not cover everything. And they can relate to the meaning of having a long-term debt because you had to take out a second mortgage on your home and what that would mean for them as they grew older. Then the next slide is, what's wrong with your current commercial health insurance plan? You are not guaranteed comprehensive health care coverage for the rest of your life without an increase in your premiums, copays, or deductibles. Our congressmen have that guarantee. Why don't all Americans have that guarantee? So notice again the words you and your. And in polls and in Drew Weston research, one of the messages that came across the most strongly for both conservatives and liberals was this particular message, that our congressmen have that guarantee, but the rest of us do not. Next slide, do you have full choice of doctors? Does your plan cover everything you need? And one of the things I'm doing here is using again the word you and your. So I'm not talking about those other people. I'm talking about the people in the audience who are financially being ripped off. And I'm using questions because sometimes a question will engage the people who are in the audience more than when you're just telling them information. Again, your family's premiums and out-of-pocket expenses are too high. And then the next one is, where does your hard-earned healthcare money go? And the reason I use these keywords is because hard-earned is a shared value between liberals and conservatives, and it will pull people in and get them to connect more with the message because I have engaged them with this shared value. And then, of course, I describe Stephen Hemsley's salary in 2019 and other details. And then, of course, a slide about how much more we are paying. So now I have shared a fact, but that's not what I started with in the presentation. A fact is fine later on when you're sharing information, but it's not the first thing you want to share. As I mentioned before, sharing a story and engaging people with shared values, like we don't want to be ripped off, is the hook. And then later on, you can put in some facts. And of course, this follow-up slide is, as you know, life expectancy at birth in the United States ranks 42nd, and deaths of mothers during childbirth is rising in the US and declining in all these other industrialized nations. The next question is, didn't the Affordable Care Act fix all the problems? And one of the reasons you bring this message into the conversation is because you want to acknowledge where people are in terms of their understanding about healthcare financing, knowing that all of you as advocates know far more of the details than the average person ever delves into. So they just kind of get a brief brush over the top of some of the information, like what was good about the Affordable Care Act. And particularly Democrats are going to be kind of defensive sometimes because they think that we should be protecting Obamacare. But you need to, throw in a fact here, acknowledging the good news with the Affordable Care Act, but what is still left in terms of the work we need to do. And then the story shifts. And basically, the story needs to shift from what the problem was to what the solution is, because we know from marketing research that if you give people bad news, but you don't give them a solution, they stop listening because it's overwhelming to deal with the problem where there's no solution. So then the next slide shifts into that solution. And again, uses language that is all about underpinning our message with shared values. Family and security are the messages in this particular slide that are shared values. And then a more practical explanation about taxes and how this will work. So you're getting into some facts, but it's been underpinned by the fact that you've delivered a message that we're talking about family security. And of course, the slide, the picture of the family is a nonverbal message about the fact that we're talking about multi-generational family security that we could have. Then the next one is you would own your healthcare plan, not the stockholders of your current commercial health insurance plan. And now notice, Warren, that I don't say for profit anymore. I just say commercial health insurance plan. Then it goes into more details about what the plan is going to look like. And it acknowledges that people are going to lose their jobs. One other thing you don't want to do is totally ignore people's legitimate concerns about what a change might mean. It's better to acknowledge that there will be a change in terms of some people not working in the health insurance industry when we finance healthcare differently, but then acknowledging what the solution to those lost jobs could mean in terms of new job opportunities and additional training promised for those people. Then a quick coverage about how the plan will cover, what it will cover, and how it will work so that people understand the taxes. And then an acknowledgement, because people often push back on increased taxes, assuming that all taxes are bad. And so this slide is intended to get people to think about, well, what would happen if we didn't tax ourselves to pay for healthcare for senior citizens? What if we didn't tax ourselves to pay for highways or libraries or police or fire protection? And it's to help people kind of shift their thinking in terms of when taxes might be unfair and too high, and when taxes are reasonable and are covering things that are important for us to have. And then a next slide is about how this would change people's financial circumstances. Why would the new plan save you money? So it's talking about the person in the audience as an individual, not some other person. Next slide is about why you need to get involved. And it's playing on the assumption that a shared value is personal responsibility, and that we should be taking personal responsibility for our healthcare financing system if it is failing our family. And again, it's talking about your family, not someone else's family. And of course, family in itself is a shared value. And then the next is why get involved? Healthcare gives your family a fighting chance. Healthcare gives your family an opportunity to be healthy because you are being hoodwinked by the pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, and commercial health insurance companies. Even if you have health insurance, your family could go bankrupt. What is the medical bankruptcy rate in other industrialized countries? 0. You should get involved because we should look out for one another and we should leave no one behind. Life is precious. Life is special. Let's do everything we can to preserve it. And this, of course, the message underlying this as a shared value is the sanctity of life. You can be a healthcare hero, and you can participate in a rally, host a house neighborhood party, invite a speaker, she'll fix it. And the rationale for this is that you leave people not only with what the grand solution is, but what they as individuals can do, some specific steps they can take to make a difference in how their family pays for healthcare. And then the final question is, what are you going to do to ensure your family has healthcare security? Well, where do these effective communication lessons come from? They are a result of the One Payer States Communications Work Group working for 5 years to read, discuss, and collect a great deal of information about how we could communicate more effectively than we are right now. Because right now we are talking to each other, and of course that's a lot more fun because we all agree, but in order for us to get any measure passed so that we have universal health care, we need to be communicating with all these other people that we have not been used to communicating with. So these were some main documents that we found helpful and that you may enjoy looking at also. One is Families USA Research that was done last year by Drew Weston. Of course, The Political Mind by Drew Weston, Resolving the Progressive Paradox by Vogel and Willer, which is actually a research article by these two Stanford researchers. And it's not about healthcare, but it's about how to persuade conservative voters to support progressive policies. Another book that we found very valuable is White Working Class by Joan Williams, Hillbilly Elegy by J.D. Vance, and Deer Hunting with Jesus by Joe Baguette. I would encourage all of you to read all of those documents. I'm happy to share any information with any of you about how to get a hold of any of those research documents, because I think they are underpin every lesson that we need to learn about how to communicate more effectively. And that's it. Do you have any questions or comments? Happy to invite those right now. And I'll leave my contact information up on the screen just for a few minutes. So if you do want to call me or email me, you're certainly welcome to do that. Thanks again for listening, and happy to listen to your questions.
Thank you, Jeannie. That was wonderful.
Yes.
Yes. Any questions for Jeannie?
I'll start with one small one. I've not heard of the book. I've heard of some of the research you put up there on the last slide. Not heard of the book Deer Hunting with Jesus. Can you give us a one paragraph synopsis?
It's such a delightful title, isn't it? It just draws you in.
It's a grabber. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Written by a man who grew up in the Bible Belt, in the area that was hit the hardest with the changes in our economy over the last 40 years. He grew up in this neighborhood, but then moved away and then came back just to visit the family, and walked into a bar and got into these conversations and realized that he understood the culture of the community where he had grown up, but he could now see it from a different viewpoint, having lived elsewhere in the country, and thought that a lot of people in the United States, especially people like all of you who would be considered professional elites, do not understand where a lot of the white working class are coming from. And we often, as professional elites, think that those working class people are voting against their best interests, and we just don't understand why. And this book was a good description about the culture and why they support certain political people that maybe some of the rest of us would never vote for. And so I thought that he did a good job of describing a culture in a way that made me realize, well, actually, I share a lot of the same views as these working class people. We do have some things in common. And I can understand also why I shouldn't be critical of them, because they have not had nearly as easy a life as I've had as a professional elite person, with the benefit of a lot of education and a lot of job opportunities that were extremely secure compared to the kind of job opportunities that the people in this community that he came from had, where, you know, they would work for a factory for 3 generations, and then suddenly that factory would be run completely by robots, and they wouldn't have jobs anymore. Well, as a nurse, you know, my job as a nurse is not nearly as threatened as their job was working in that factory.
Okay, thank you. Other questions for Nancy? You're muted.
Really, it was a lovely, wonderful application of all the methods and principles I know about, and you did an excellent job. I have one kind of just a question. I'm just curious. Did you, was that implicit message of speaking to people who were in unions? Was that an implicit message to have the first slide with Rosie the Riveter and then Leonard be a union person? Did you mean that as an implicit message? I'm just curious.
Yes.
You did, okay. That's sneaky, but I like that.
Okay. Other questions or comments?
Good.
Warren?
Thank you, Jeannie. That was excellent. And I noticed a few things I hadn't seen before that are quite good. One of the things that you highlight that resonates with me is shared values are a lot easier, more at the local level. And so I'm just curious about if you have arrived at any conclusions, whether it might be easier to achieve universal care at a more local level than at the federal level.
Absolutely. I think that we are going to go state by state. I think we're depending on Oregon and some other states to lead the way, and then the rest of us will follow, much like they did in Canada, where they started in Saskatchewan province and eventually got the entire country covered. We know that politically, our message will resonate much more strongly in a state that is more liberal than one that is more conservative. So I think that's why we're going to start with some of the states that are more likely to elect Democrats as governors. All of those things I think will matter. I don't think that nationally we'll be able to achieve this from the very beginning like Bernie Sanders would like. And of course, that would be my preference because that would mean everyone would get coverage that's fair and equitable sooner. But I don't think that it's likely to play out that way just because as the anthropologist in your group would say, there are different cultures in different parts of the country.
Okay, thank you. We'll go to Rick and then to Kelsey.
Hi, thanks for that great presentation. In fact, it was so great. I was wondering if we could have the slides. It would really help me remember what you're saying and how to put together a talk like this.
Of course, happy to share the slides. And Mike already has the slides. In fact, Mike has all my slides, but Mike only gave me 20 minutes. And of course, you know, as a former politician, I could talk a lot longer than that. He has my slides, and you can hide some of the slides and then click on that one slide and show them again, as you know. So you can have all my entire slideshow for the Rotarians, and you could pick, you know, which ones you like and borrow, and anything you think would be useful, I'm happy to share.
Thank you very much. That'll be great. And the book list too.
Yes, thank you. Kelsey.
Yeah, I have a question. With the pandemic kind of still going on, have you adapted your messaging to account for that? Because that could be a really relatable element for everybody to show how interconnected our healthcare, that like, even if, you know, even if you have private health insurance, if your entire county gets overwhelmed with COVID, you still are at risk of not having a hospital bed. So I just wonder if you've adapted any of your political messaging to include pandemic things.
Yes, in fact, in the full slideshow, there is some reference to the pandemic and what that meant in terms of people losing their jobs, people who had health insurance before and now not having health insurance, and how it can affect the community as a whole. And I think that the pandemic message will resonate in the short term, but may not in the long term. And it may resonate more with certain audiences than others, particularly an audience that perceives a bigger threat by the pandemic, I think would be more concerned, like maybe a rural community that knows we've only got 3 intensive care beds in our hospital. Otherwise, they're going to have to ship me out if I get into trouble.
Other questions? Not seeing a hand in the air at the moment, but somebody, Linda.
Hi, thank you, Jeanne. You have this great story that's your neighbor. It's a true story. We don't all have that relevant of a story that fits right into the narrative that well, although maybe we all have stories. I mean, I have a story about my own husband and health insurance. But my question is, how do you You know, you got to have the right message for the right group of people with the right messenger. Is there a pool of story? I mean, how do you deal with that piece about a story that somebody can relate to, but that's also true and that you can say is from your own experience or somebody close to you?
I think there's a bank of stories that One Payer States actually has provided that you can use from their website. So if you're stumped and need a story and can't figure out one just personally from, you know, your own life or someone near you, you can use the stories that have been banked there. But, you know, I think you're more likely when you're having conversations with your friends to be able to learn about stories if you ask about them. I think that our culture has discouraged people from talking about their health, especially in detail, whether it was that they were embarrassed or whatever the reasons were. But I think when you connect with people because you're all advocates, you can ask people, do you have a story personally that you'd be willing to share? Because your story may be something that someone else can relate to far better than some fact about the trillions of dollars that we'll save at the national level, which just sounds too impersonal to people.
And that's great advice. Thank you.
Yes. Kate.
Yeah, I have some good news for all of you about stories. For 2 years now, I've been working with your organization to put together a video that has about 10 stories in it. We banked about several hours of interviews with people. The best story makes up a good deal of the video because it's incredibly compelling story, but there are little snips of other people's stories, including mine, because of my 2 beautiful hips I got when I lived in Canada. And so you're not going to have to search very hard for stories, local stories. They are all from our community. There are people who lived here. There are people who had all kinds of issues with health and horrendous issues with their finances and everything all of the issues that we could find. When Mark actually, God rest his soul, came to me and said that he wanted to do a video. He wanted to do one about the survey that was done for Oregon. And what I told him was, well, Mark, that's okay, but what you really need is stories. And so that's what we did. So there's a whole library of stories. If you've been looking at Facebook, there's been a few of them that have been posted already. They were in their very rough edit condition. Where we have one more session tomorrow where I'm hoping to finish most of the video, and then I got one more time to just put a little music and sweetening on it, is what we call when we tighten everything up and make it pretty and sound good. And then you'll be able to use it. And again, as I say, it's not just the stories that are in the video. Every person who you see in the video has given us some really, really good stories, but we made some of them very short, and this one particular one is featured. So
Great. Yeah. I have a former student who now has a PhD and teaches public health at a university in New Hampshire, and did her PhD on using storytelling to bringing healthcare to third world people living in third world countries, and so I've become a big believer as I've watched this woman go through her career.
As I say, as a television producer, that's all we do. Everything you want to communicate, you want to tell a story. And I've been doing that for companies and nonprofits for forever. You know, the facts are important, but unless they're connected to people who have life experience that you can share, that you can relate to, as Jeannie is so perfectly said, you're not going to hook people in to pay attention. So,
Right.
Nice job, Jeannie. Thank you.
Yes, and I appreciated your starting with
Thank you.
values in what you were training us on here. It seems so critical, and we lose track of the fact that we actually have values in common in our country, not just values in difference. So I appreciate that that's where you began. One last question from anybody before we take a shift in our meeting?
This is Mike.
Yeah.
In a abbreviated fashion, Jeannie, could you tell your two stories about how you persuaded or got some help in persuading people in Boulder to vaccinate their kids, and also your experience in the lady who asked you if you owned a pickup?
See, Mike is demonstrating my point perfectly, that what Mike really remembers of everything I've ever said to him, he remembers my stories because they just stick in your mind better. So I was a public health nurse for Boulder, Colorado Health Department. We had the worst childhood immunization rates in the state. Obviously, it was my responsibility to figure out how to improve those rates. I could have and had been, you know, standing in front of parents with my hands on my hips as a public health nurse saying, you've got to immunize your children, here are the facts. And it wasn't working. And my public health nurses I supervised weren't getting any further than I was in persuading these parents. So we decided to write a proposal, get a grant, and hire an advertising company. Something public health typically doesn't do is work with advertising companies. Totally foreign ground for us. But we hired this advertising company who understood the problem that we were describing. Then they put their heads together and figured out what we should say to the parents. They came up with this display on the side of huge public transportation buses in Boulder that was a picture of 10 adorable Boulder County babies, all with cloth diapers because it's Boulder, of course, all sitting there looking precious and cute, obviously racially different from one another. And that's Boulder too. And 3 of the babies had targets on them. And the bottom underneath the pictures said, 3 out of 10 Boulder County babies are at risk for disease. Get your child vaccinated. Very powerful message that we as public health nurses would have never thought of, nor would we have ever thought that we should advertise on the sides of public transportation buses. And I think the point from that for me was that I learned that I need partners, people who are experts like Warren is in business and like you are, Kate, in video production, and Bobby, like you are in understanding cultures, that you can't just have one of us who knows the answers. We really need to be a team and work together, because we can learn from each other and get a far better product and be more effective in getting the rest of the country to understand what we already understand about why we have to change healthcare financing. So the second story is one that Mike heard me tell about what it was like for me to campaign for the state Senate. I was invited to Grand County. Some of you may have heard of Winter Park Ski Area. That's Grand County territory. And the Central Democratic Party invited me to come and speak for 3 minutes. And then the group would listen to what I had to say, ask me a few questions, and then they would decide if they were going to support me for the state Senate. So I drove up there thinking about the 3-minute speech and gave my 3-minute speech. And there was this very beautiful, dainty woman in her early 70s, sitting in the front row, leaning forward. I could tell she was going to ask the first question after I finished speaking, and she did. And she said, "Do you own a pickup truck?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am. Dodge diesel, long bed with an extended cab." And she said, "Well, all right then." That was the end of the interview, and they supported me for the Senate. What I had to say meant nothing. The fact that I owned the right pickup truck was what mattered.
And I gather you really did own it. You didn't make that up.
I did. That's a really important point, Mark, is that people know when you are genuine. And they may know it only on a gut level, but they know when they're just being tricked and you're not genuine and you're being dishonest. So I would never, ever suggest that you tell a story that's not true or share something, a fact that looks like a fact, but it isn't really true. You just exaggerated it. That always comes back to haunt people. I think just being honest and using the information that we all have is plenty. Our stories, our true stories, are very powerful. We don't need to make anything up. We can just be absolutely genuine when we're presenting information, and it works better.